Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back in to talk about the first two bosses of Heroic Siege of Zuldazar and some of my experiences testing those bosses as Discipline Priest. Alright, first off, we had Frida Iron Bellows, and it's a standard boss paladin that has two different seals that she applies, and those can augment and increase her damage that she ends up doing, as well as she has three little adds that are around who can heal each other, basically put a disorient effect onto the entire raid. You know, nothing too different than having to turn around for the displacement on the boss in this snake boss, for example, in Temple of Sethralus. So it's something that we're kind of familiar with, and it's a very easy intro boss where one seal will increase the boss's damage if any of the adds are killed while it's up, and then another seal will increase her damage if anybody attacks her. So important, just switch targets at will, make sure you're hitting the right target at the right time, and you should be all set, right? But in terms of healing the fight, it was a lot of fun to be able to have, you know, the opportunity to kind of test some little bit of weird talents and a little bit of different talents, as you might see at the top of your screen here. I wanted to see how it would look taking Twist of Fate and Contrition. We had seen a post on MMO Champ about a month ago, where it looked like a tooltip update or maybe a buff to defensive penance. Turned out it was just an update to Castigation's tooltip. Whenever you spec'd into it, it would properly account for having that fourth tick, right? So not having any defensive penance buff, but we wanted to see what it would actually end up being like if defensive penance was just a little bit stronger. And I think a lot of these fights, you know, a lot of these pulls, since we did end up killing both bosses, it was actually really cool to be able to see what it would end up being like if defensive penance is a little bit stronger. You know, the spec it still is in a tremendously strong position through all of Uldir and all through a lot of the testing that I was doing, right? And I think in many ways, Twist of Fate's uptime really carried the build. But going forward, I think more than anything else, if defensive penance was at a position where it's not this kind of crappy squirt gun, you know, and it was actually going to be more efficient and competitive to use over, say, a Shadow Mend, even if you didn't actually have the Power of the Dark Side proc, right? Getting into that build and being encouraged to use penance defensively, or even having the option to be able to use it, I think is tremendously important for the spec, and also just very important towards making sure there's flexibility in the gameplay here, right? We saw a lot of times through, we're seeing a lot through forums and conversation really about class mechanics going to BfA, where a lot of people aren't too thrilled about some of the changes to their classes or some of the things that they've lost from Legion. And Discipline, while they definitely did lose things in the way of like Light's Wrath, for example, many of the best things of the spec were carried forward, and even new improvements were given to it to make it more competitive for Mythic Plus in particular, but also some opportunities to be more flexible. In alpha and beta raid testing, for example, Contrition was extremely strong for a short period of time, and once they realized that, they gutted it down and they brought it down to size. Now, I don't think that at this point that Contrition is a bad talent, but I think it does need to have penance defensive usage be a lot more encouraged to be a viable build and be a potential competitive build. As it stands right now, I think it's kind of a meme build on live servers that would really require very high Twist of Fate uptime in order to carry it. But in order to make it actually really work and pump in a progression environment, and even on a consistent basis, for example, on fights that still have reasonable damage onto them and are not complete farm, I think it could very well be a legit build if defensive penance was buffed before 8-1. And I know it's kind of weird saying, oh, Disc Priest needs more buffs or anything like that, because the spec is in such a strong position already. But this would, in my mind, be something that's a lot more focused on making sure that the spec is going to be more varied, making sure there's going to be a lot more choice throughout these encounters, right? I think there's opportunity, for example, for a lot of spot healing, a lot of tank healing in that first encounter. And then as we go on to a fight like Grong, which is the second boss that we did kill through the PTR testing, there's a lot of split and spread and varied raid damage. And even though I continued with Twist of Fate and Contrition, I think it very much stands out as an encounter that you'd want to have Schism and Sins to be able to really pump that burst healing when you activate the Tantrum. It's a predictable mechanic, it's a predictable burst on the group, and it's activated by the raid team, so you can even have, you know, some kind of choice and say, hey, hold off for like 2 more seconds here as I set this up, and then you're able to go, right? And be able to have that greatest effect possible. So in many ways, I do think that Disc has had a great start to Uldir and has been immensely powerful throughout progression, and be able to kind of fill in throughout a lot of the encounters, both in predictable burst patterns and a lot of spread encounters, which were, you know, predominant in the 3 hardest fights of the instance, which was probably like Fetid, Mithrax, and Gahun. So it's been in a great position here, but I think that one of the most important things throughout this entire expansion, especially when we have no tier set bonuses, is that we need to see some kind of variance. I don't really want to be in a position where I'm playing the exact same spec that I had on day 1 that I have at the end of the expansion, right? This one's a lot of fun. I love it to death, but we need to make sure, at least from our perspective as players, that we make it very clear that we don't want to have the same thing over and over and over again. And we've heard promises, for example, that Azerite pieces are going to be more complicated, more varied, but we haven't seen anything yet. One of the best ways I think that we can easily make the spec more varied is actually make sure there's reasonable choices, right? I think the talents, like I mentioned, are close enough that you could actually start getting some value from them, because the 75 tier, compared to some of the other talents, for example, are not insane or anything like that. You know, for example, Sins, Contrition, and Shadow Covenant are not super insane raid talents or anything like that, but there is that option to make sure that you can actually augment and change your playstyle depending on the encounters or depending on just what you enjoy the most. Right now, I think Twisted Fate and Contrition is kind of just a meme build on live, but it could be so much more with a couple tweaks here and there. And with proper, you know, playstyle and proper setup, for example, you can actually have some choice in terms of how you want to play. Other classes, for example, have kind of seen the options where, like Fist Weaving has had the option of, you know, rising up and taking Rising Mist to have a Fist Weaving build, but it became kind of memey, and a lot of monks just need to be able to fill in that niche of tank healing, so they went into tank sitting, right? But are we going to really want to have that position all the way at the end of the expansion where they're still tank sitting, they're still playing in the same way? Early on in the expansion, I think they're a lot more willing to be able to make those kind of changes, and I think it's the better opportunity. It always is the best opportunity to be able to talk about it early and often, about wanting to make sure there's going to be meaningful changes to our playstyle and evolving and actually feeling not only more powerful as you progress in gear, but also that you're able to fully develop the spec and actually have some kind of options, you know. Maybe it's a little bit of a wet dream, but I'd be curious as to what you guys think, and maybe some of your thoughts on the first 2 bosses, as well as, you know, if you've played with the Twisted Fate Contrition style, what you think of it, if it would be a good addition, if you do think, like I do, that having the option to be more spot heal focused if you need to, or, you know, if you just want to stick with that burst healing that we all know and love throughout Legion and into BfA. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Also check out the live stream linked down there as well. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you all next time.